The sound that pulled me from my chair wasn't the creak of my ranch house settling, or the wind cutting through the canyons. It was laughter. Mean, sharp laughter echoing across the fence line at twilight. I stepped onto my porch, and there they were, the HOA president, Margaret Ellis, and 2 of her board members. They stood on the ridge behind my property, smug smiles painted on their faces, watching as bulldozers chewed up the slope that gave my family the only view we ever cared about, the sweeping valley, golden in the evening sun. They'd approved new community amenities, which was just a dressed-up phrase for a clubhouse expansion nobody wanted. They hadn't warned me, they hadn't asked, they just showed up with their heavy equipment and cut into the land I had looked over for 20 years. Margaret raised a hand like she was conducting a symphony, grinning as the machines knocked down at the last stand of oak trees. She shouted across the distance, "Guess you'll have to find another spot for your morning coffee." Her board members laughed harder. The sound was carried on the wind like a taunt I couldn't ignore. I clenched my jaw and said nothing. That's the thing about people like Margaret. They feed on reaction. They needed you to yell back so they could slap a fine on your mailbox or threaten to revoke community privileges. I'd dealt with them for years, and every time I pushed back, they dug deeper. This time, I kept my silence. Inside, my wife tried to hold back her frustration, but I could see it in her eyes. She'd spent her mornings on that porch for years, sketchbook in hand, drawing the ridges and valleys as the sun rose. Now, when the dust settled, all she'd see was cinder block and shingles. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that laughter again. The sound of people who believed they had the final say. The sound of a arrogance of power unchecked. At 3 a.m., I heard a new sound, boots crunching gravel outside my window. I rose quietly, hand resting on the bat I kept by the door. My porch light snapped on, flooding the yard. There, half buried in the dew, was a folded notice shoved into the slats of my fence. It read, "All landscaping modifications must be pre-approved by HOA. Violation fees will apply." And below that, a single handwritten line, "Don't even think about it." I lifted my eyes to the ridge. A set of headlights had just cut off, stopping on the road above my property. By sunrise, the threat felt heavier than paper. That handwritten line wasn't just HOA boilerplate, it was personal. The headlights from the ridge had disappeared by the time I stepped out with my coffee, but the mud tracks near the fence told me someone had been close, closer than they should have dared. I tucked the notice into my pocket and went about the morning as if nothing had changed, but my gut told me the board wasn't finished. Sure enough, the first official letter came 2 days later. A fine for improper fence maintenance, $500. My fence had been solid oak posts, maintained yearly, no rot, no lean. The accusation was absurd. When I refused to pay, the next letter came. Violation for unauthorized shed construction. I didn't even own a shed. The paper storm escalated, each envelope thicker, each fine higher. They were baiting me, waiting for me to slip, to lose my temper. But I'd been trained to recognize psychological warfare when I saw it. Neighbors started whispering. Some came by, quietly supportive. Old man Whitaker across the road muttered, "They've been gunning for you since you told them to shove that pool project." Others kept their distance, blinds drawn when I passed. A few, like the Carsons, sided openly with Margaret, repeating the party line, "It's for the immunity's good. Rules are rules." Still, the intimidation grew bolder. 3 men in reflective vests showed up one afternoon, claiming to be inspectors. No IDs, no paperwork, just clipboards and smug smirks. They strutted through my yard like they owned it, snapping pictures of everything from my gutters to my rose bushes. When I confronted them, they muttered, "HOA business, step aside." I didn't. I stood in their path, voice steady. "You're trespassing. Get off my land." They hesitated. One tried to puff his chest, muttering about calling the sheriff. I simply raised my phone and took their pictures. They left quicker than they arrived, but not without one of them hissing, "You'll regret this." That night, a knock rattled my door at 10 p.m. I opened it to find another notice pinned crudely to my welcome mat. "Remove unauthorized landscaping or face daily fines." But the landscaping in question, my wife's rose bushes, the same ones she'd tended for 15 years. What would you do if your HOA threatened to tear up the garden your family built with their own hands? Comment below. I want to know if you'd have kept your calm or if you'd have snapped right then. The next morning, I caught a glimpse that made my blood run cold. A black SUV idling at the corner, 2 men inside with mirrored sunglasses watching my house. And then, the unmistakable glint of a badge lifted just enough for me to see. Cliffhanger. The HOA wasn't just fining me anymore. They were sending in fakes. By now, the game had shifted from paper fines to physical intimidation. Fake badges, unmarked SUVs, men loitering where they didn't belong. This wasn't the petty HOA bureaucracy most people imagined. This was targeted pressure, a message. We can reach you anytime we want. The first act of real trespass happened on a Tuesday night. My daughter heard the sound first, metal scraping against wood near the back fence. I killed the porch light and moved silently through the house, the way training had taught me years ago. Every step measured, every breath under control. Through the kitchen window, I saw them. 2 men in dark jackets, hoods up, working at the fence line with bolt cutters. They weren't here to leave notices. They were here to break through. My floodlights snapped on with a pop. The men froze, caught in the sudden blaze of white. For a split second, I saw their faces. Young, cocky, one with a patchy beard. They weren't law enforcement. They weren't even professionals. Just hired muscle pretending to be. "Step away from my fence," I called out, voice steady, clear. I didn't shout. Authority doesn't need volume, it needs precision. They hesitated, muttered something to each other, then dropped the cutters and backed off, disappearing into the tree line. But the message was clear. Next time, they'd push further. The very next morning, my wife found tire tracks carved deep into our front lawn. The roses, her roses, had been hacked down, stems shredded, petals scattered like red confetti across the dirt. No note this time, just destruction. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as I walked the yard, cataloging every cut, every print. Nobody came forward. Nobody spoke. Fear had gripped the cul-de-sac tighter than the HOA rules ever could. I reinforced the locks, checked the cameras, secured the perimeter. But as night fell again, I knew preparation wasn't enough. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about control, intimidation, and breaking the one man who wouldn't bend. At midnight, the SUV returned. This time, it didn't idle. It rolled right into my driveway, headlights glaring through the living room windows like spotlights. Doors opened. Heavy boots hit gravel. 5 shadows moved toward my porch, slow and deliberate, the glint of fake badges catching the moonlight. Stood in the darkened hallway, calm as stone, hand resting on the cold steel of the weapon I kept legally secured for moments exactly like this. The pounding on my front door rattled the frame. "Open up!" one of them barked, flashing that fake badge toward the window. The others spread out across the porch and yard, forming a half circle like they'd rehearsed it. I didn't move right away. I let the silence stretch until their nerves began to show. Then I spoke, voice cutting through the night. "You're trespassing on private property. Step away from my home." One of them sneered. "We're here on HOA authority. You don't get to say no." I opened the door slowly, just enough for the porch light to fall across my face. Calm, steady, deliberate. My sidearm rested at my hip, holstered but visible, not pointed, not threatened, just present. The bearded one stepped forward, puffing his chest. "You think you're tough, huh? Pay your fines, tear out your landscaping, or things get—" "Careful with your next word," I interrupted, voice flat, "because it'll be the last one you say standing." The group froze. Control shifted instantly. They weren't facing a nervous homeowner. They were facing someone who had trained his entire life to stand his ground. One tried bluffing, waving the badge again. "We're officers. You'll regret this." I stepped closer, eyes locked. "That's not a real badge. Impersonating law enforcement carries prison time. Right now, you're just a pack of thugs trespassing with intent to intimidate." They shifted, restless, the thin veneer of authority cracking under pressure. My floodlights blazed brighter, illuminating every face, every trembling hand. Behind them, I caught a flicker of blinds parting. Neighbors were watching. Finally. Witnesses. "This is your last warning," I said, projecting my voice like a command post briefing. "Step off my porch, drop whatever you're carrying, sit down on the gravel, or I make the call that ends this entire game tonight." The ringleader laughed nervously, but his voice cracked. "You don't scare us," I leaned. in just enough for him to see I wasn't bluffing. You thought you could break me, but you didn't know who you were dealing with. For the first time, I saw real fear flash across their faces. One backed away, muttering about leaving. Another cursed under his breath. The bearded one held out longer than the rest, but when I unclipped my phone and began dialing, his bravado collapsed. He dropped his fake badge onto the porch with a metallic clink. The others followed, kneeling slowly on the gravel under the harsh glow of my lights, hands raised. The sirens cut through the night like a blade, bouncing off the canyon walls until they drowned out even the pounding of my own heart. Blue and red strobes swept across the cul-de-sac as two sheriff cruisers skidded to a stop at the end of my drive. The men on the gravel froze. Their eyes darted between me and the incoming law, panic overtaking the arrogance they had carried here just minutes before. Deputies spilled out, weapons drawn, commanding voices sharp and practiced. Hands where we can see them. Now! The hired muscle complied instantly, dropping whatever they held, palms splayed toward the night sky. The lead deputy, a man I'd seen around town for years, shot me a look. Steady, questioning. I nodded once. The scene explained itself. Within minutes, the fake officers were cuffed, their so-called badges confiscated. Up close, the fraud was undeniable. Cheap knockoffs, ordered online, nothing more than tin and paint. But paired with intimidation, they had been enough to frighten half the neighborhood. Margaret Ellis herself arrived not long after, summoned by the chaos, her robe pulled tight as if she'd been woken from sleep. But the mask of concern she wore cracked the moment she saw her men in the restraints. One of them, desperate, shouted across the yard, "She paid us! She told us to scare him!" Her face drained of color. The deputies turned to her. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us. HOA or not, this looks like conspiracy, harassment, and impersonation of law enforcement." She tried to sputter denials, but the board members standing behind her, neighbors who had finally gathered, didn't back her up. Instead, they stepped away, letting her stand alone in the glare of the lights. My wife stood beside me, fingers tight around my arm, watching the woman who had tormented us for years be escorted into the back of a squad car. The next weeks unfolded with legal precision. Charges were filed: impersonation, trespass, harassment, conspiracy to commit fraud. The county tore into the HOA's books, unearthing years of mismanagement, misuse of funds, and intimidation campaigns aimed at anyone who dared push back. By month's end, the HOA was dissolved. Margaret Ellis was awaiting trial. Neighbors who had once hidden behind curtains now came forward, some to apologize, others to thank me. And slowly, the weight that had settled over our street lifted. One morning, as I sipped coffee on my porch, the valley stretched wide before me. Scarred, yes, but alive. 1,000 saplings I had planted lined the ridge where the bulldozers had cut. They reached upward, green against the sky, promising a view that would one day outlast every wall, every cinder block, every HOA president's scheme. Months later, the HOA sign at the neighborhood entrance was gone, just grass where it once stood, the symbol of control erased. As the sun set over the cul-de-sac, the only sound left was silence, the kind of silence you earn after a battle won,